IBM is an example of an IT vendor that has been around since very early on. It made its name originally as a provider of mainframes. They ran software which was used to run the core business, with manufacturing and banking being at the heart of industry. A typical role for this software was, and still is, Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP. Users interacted with these servers via terminals, a monochrome screen and keyboard, which were purely text-based. IBM had become the leader in the mainframe market, even back in the 70s, and you might be surprised to know they are still the leader in that market. Even after all this time, mainframe-class computers are in use in many large organisations. Of course, these days they support a much more modern user interface, typically accessed via PCs. The IBM PC started as a bit of a punt. Whereas mainframes are vertically integrated and proprietary, meaning all hardware and software from a single vendor, the PC was based on an open architecture and designed with a more collaborative approach in mind. While IBM owned the architecture, the processing at its core was based on Intel technology, which generically became known as x86. The disk operating system was developed by a young new company called Microsoft. The software was called Microsoft Disk Operating System, or DOS for short. How imaginative. The intent of the PC was to provide computing power to individuals as a productivity tool. The two main applications for PCs being word processing, in competition with typewriters, and spreadsheets, designed as a flexible alternative to paper-based accounting. It was never envisaged that PC technology could ever impinge on IBM's mainframe business. An IBM PC cost in the region of $1,500, whereas a mainframe might cost millions. IBM-compatible PCs are now called industry standard PCs. They are designed and built by a range of manufacturers and have come a long way since their humble beginnings. So in IBM, we have examples of two extremes: the seemingly never-changing world of the mainframe and the upstart world of the PC. These two products are also a great segue into two worlds of IT, the seen and the unseen. The seen world includes the systems which we interact with in our working lives, and more often than not in our home lives too. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, famously laid out his vision as a PC on every desk. These days, desktop PCs are regarded as old school. Industry has moved on and people have become far more mobile in their work patterns. Laptops are now the norm, although, ironically, they are more often found on desks than on the road, because new devices like tablets and smartphones have become the mobile devices of choice. All of these are collectively called client devices. The unseen world of IT consists of computer rooms and data centres. Unseen because, as shared resources, the uptime of these facilities has become mission critical and they are highly protected. Only a select few engineers are authorised to enter these places to ensure continued operations.
Hi John, I was wondering if you could let me into the data center. Why not? That is ridiculous.
Vendors in the seen world are highly visible with high-profile brands. The vanguard of the industry standard PC includes names such as HP and Dell, as well as laptop vendors such as Acer, Asus, and more recently, Microsoft. There is an obvious name missing here. Yes, IBM. IBM decided strategically to exit the commoditized desktop and laptop markets and sold these businesses to Lenovo, which continues to successfully develop these product lines. The other big name, of course, is Apple. Apple reinvented itself again with the launch of the iPhone in 2007, then moved firmly into the mobile computing market with the iPad in 2010. Apple had long been a niche but highly respected player in the personal computing arena, but using their own proprietary architecture and operating system. For many years, its success was limited to specialist media-based applications. This started to change with the adoption of Intel processors and the ability to run Microsoft Office and other PC-based software. The popularity of iPhone and iPad, coupled with Apple's brand values, has meant a huge rise in popularity in their laptops and desktop range. Apple continues to be strong in the media space too. So what about this unseen world of data centers? Which are the big players in here? First of all, we should again mention IBM. As we already know, mainframes are still around in many larger organizations, often in the manufacturing and banking sectors. Mainframes are shared by many users and are critical to business operations. This is really the definition of any server. Servers typically sit inside data centers, or as a minimum, inside dedicated computer rooms in smaller organizations. IBM's mainframe business generates several $billions each year. However, if we look at the split of all servers by operating system, we can see this is just a fraction of the overall market. Perhaps just 2% of server units sold are mainframes. After mainframes, the next wave in server operating systems was Unix. At one point, over half of the server market was running Unix. However, today, it's more like 6%. The main hardware vendors in this space are HP Enterprise, which had acquired Compaq and DEC in 2001, Oracle, which acquired Sun Microsystems, and of course IBM. In the heyday of Unix, Sun was the biggest player, closely followed by HP. Note that although Unix can run on industry standard servers derived from the IBM PC architecture, most Unix servers are more proprietary. For example, for many years, HPE's Unix server range was architected around the DEC Alpha processor, and more recently, through collaboration with Intel, the Intel Itanium processor. HPE also has its own implementation of the Unix operating system called HPUX. Sun's Unix servers, now under Oracle, continue to use SPARC processor architecture and its own Unix variant called Solaris. The original aim of Unix was to break the hold of vendors over the hardware and the software. However, as you can see, Unix servers continue to be quite tightly integrated with hardware and operating system from the same vendor. Unix had a big following in the IT world, and many who grew up with it did not want to move over to the dark side, represented by Microsoft Windows. So there was a pent-up demand for a version of Unix which could run on cheaper industry standard hardware and which did not lock in users to any specific vendor. In 1994, Linux was launched by Linus Torvalds. This is a Unix-like operating system which is open source in nature. This makes it essentially free for developers to use and enhance. This was a period when the internet was booming and developing at pace. Linux provided a way for web servers to be deployed without having to pay Microsoft or anyone else software license fees. Unsurprisingly, this sector of the server market really took off and represents about 14% of it today. Although Linux itself is free, in enterprise environments there is a requirement for software to be managed and supported to ensure uptime. Now we have distributions of Linux provided by vendors which include these enterprise requirements. Big names in this space include Red Hat, now part of IBM, SUSE, part of Novell, and Ubuntu, part of Canonical. By far the biggest slice of the server market is running Microsoft Windows Server as the operating system, over 70%. From a hardware perspective, these and the Linux servers are all industry standard, or sometimes x86. Their architecture is derived from the industry standard PC. The big hardware vendors here are mainly names we already know. HPE and Dell, they're the market leaders. IBM does not appear here. Similar to its exit from the client device market, IBM also later sold its industry standard server business to Lenovo. With the recent rise of cloud computing and the purchasing power of hyperscale service providers like Amazon, Google and Microsoft, some of the x86 server market has gone over to new players. By collaborating with the hyperscalers, they have stripped down the design of their servers and provide a more customized, lower cost solution for their purposes. Inspur took investment from Microsoft and is now partnering with IBM. H3C is partnering with HPE. There is also a collection of other manufacturers who work with the hyperscalers, which IDC collectively calls ODM Direct, meaning Original Design Manufacturer. Their business alone, including data storage and servers, is worth about $21 billion in 2019, according to IDC. It looks like that renegade PC project did have an impact on IBM's mainframe business after all.